The Drakesh had been watching the stars long before most civilizations learned to look up at the night sky. These creatures were living legends, massive beings that looked like the ancient dragons from human mythology, but far more magnificent and terrifying. Each one stretched nearly a kilometer from snout to tail, their scales shimmering with colors that seemed to shift between dimensions. They didn't need ships to travel through space. They simply existed in the void, moving between star systems as easily as a bird glides through air. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy knew about them. The Drakesh appeared in the oldest records of races that had been exploring the cosmos for millions of years. They were always there, positioned near certain worlds, floating in specific sectors of space, watching with eyes that held the weight of ages. Nobody knew why they chose the places they did. Nobody understood their purpose. And most frustrating of all, nobody could get them to speak. It wasn't for lack of trying. The Valorians, a species known for their diplomatic prowess, had spent 3,000 years attempting to establish contact with a single Drakesh. They tried every form of communication imaginable: radio waves, light patterns, mathematical sequences, even telepathic projection. The dragon-like being never responded, never even acknowledged their presence. The Metra, a race of highly advanced artificial intelligences, had calculated over 10 million possible ways to initiate dialogue. None worked. The Drakesh remained as silent and unmoved as mountains. Some species worshipped them as gods. Others feared them as omens of doom. A few aggressive civilizations had even tried to attack them, thinking perhaps violence would provoke some reaction. Those attempts ended badly. The Drakesh proved nearly indestructible, and on the rare occasions when truly threatened, they could unleash power that made stars look dim. But even then, they never spoke. They simply defended themselves and returned to their silent vigil. This frustrated the galaxy to no end. Here were beings of obvious intelligence and immense power, clearly aware of everything happening around them, yet completely unwilling to engage. Entire academic fields were dedicated to studying them. Philosophers debated their motives. Religious leaders incorporated them into creation myths. Scientists monitored their every movement, hoping for clues. But the Drakesh gave nothing. They were the universe's greatest mystery, present yet entirely unreachable. Then humanity arrived on the galactic stage. Humans were newcomers, barely 200 years into space travel, still figuring out faster-than-light drives and establishing their first colonies beyond their home system. They were enthusiastic, curious, and hopelessly naive about galactic politics. Other species found them amusing or annoying depending on the day. These young upstarts asked too many questions, poked their noses into too many places, and had an irritating habit of making friends with species that others avoided. When humans established their colony on Meridian 7, a pleasant world with breathable air and reasonable gravity, they discovered they had a neighbor. Cartheron had been stationed in that sector for longer than human civilization had existed. The massive Drakesh floated in the space between Meridian 7 and its moon, a constant presence visible from the colony's observation platforms. He looked like something out of an ancient legend, his scales reflecting the light of the system's star in shades of deep bronze and gold. The human colonists reacted exactly as humans do when encountering something new and mysterious. They tried to talk to him. Commander David Peterson led the first diplomatic mission, broadcasting greetings in every language humanity knew, along with mathematical proofs and images meant to show peaceful intent. Cartheron didn't move. Didn't blink. Gave no sign he even heard them. But unlike other species, humans didn't give up easily. They also didn't let the mystery stop them from going about their lives. The colony grew. Families moved in. People started building homes, planting gardens, opening shops and schools. And Cartheron became part of the scenery, a massive dragon floating in their sky, beautiful and silent and completely unknowable. Nobody thought anything would change. Why would it? The Drakesh had maintained their silence for millions of years. They'd ignored species far more advanced than humanity. What could these newcomers possibly do that would make a difference? Then one ordinary afternoon, a young woman named Holly Martinez decided to take her 6-month-old daughter to the main observation deck. Little Maya had been fussy all morning, and Holly thought the view might calm her down. The observation deck offered a perfect view of Cartheron, who happened to be particularly close to the station that day, close enough to see the intricate patterns on his scales and the ancient wisdom in his enormous eyes. Holly strapped Maya to her chest in a baby carrier and joined a small group of colonists who were having their daily speculation about what the Drakesh might be thinking. Maya gurgled and waved her tiny hands as her mother chatted with neighbors. And then something impossible happened. Maya had been making baby noises all morning, the usual collection of coos and gurgles that 6-month-olds produce. But as she stared out at Cartharon through the observation window, something changed. Her little face scrunched up in concentration, and she reached both tiny hands toward the massive dragon floating in space. Then she made a sound that stopped Holly mid-sentence. Yuan-ku. It was clear enough that the woman standing next to Holly laughed. Did she just try to say something? Holly smiled and bounced Maya gently. Just baby talk. She's been experimenting with sounds all week. But even as she said it, Maya was still reaching toward Cartharon, her face lit up with the kind of pure joy babies reserve for seeing something they love. Holly had seen that expression before, usually when Maya spotted her grandfather or her favorite uncle coming through the door. The group of colonists continued their conversation, debating whether the Drakesh ever slept or if they needed to eat. Holly started to turn away from the window, ready to head home for Maya's nap time. But Maya twisted in her carrier, craning her little neck to keep Cartharon in view. And then, clear as a bell, she said it again. Uncle. This time there was no mistaking it. It was a real word, perfectly pronounced in that high, sweet voice that only babies have. Holly froze. Around her, the other colonists stopped talking. It was Maya's first word, and she'd said it while looking at a creature that had been silent for millions of years. Did you hear that? Someone whispered. Before Holly could respond, something happened that made every human on the observation deck take a step back from the window. Cartharon moved. Not the small, unconscious drifts that came from solar winds or gravitational pulls. This was deliberate, purposeful movement. The massive dragon's head, which had been angled slightly away from the station, turned. Slowly, with the weight of mountains shifting, Cartharon rotated until he was facing the observation deck directly. His eyes, each one larger than a shuttlecraft, focused on the window. On them. On the baby girl still reaching out and babbling happily. Alarms started blaring throughout the station. In the command center, every monitor that tracked Cartharon lit up with warnings. Commander Peterson rushed to the observation deck, his security team right behind him. Other colonists began backing away from the windows, parents pulling their children close. Throughout human history, when something massive and powerful suddenly pays attention to you, it usually means you're in trouble. But Cartharon didn't attack. Didn't unleash any of the devastating power that the Drakesh were known to possess. Instead, he came closer. Meter by meter, the ancient being glided through space until he was nearer to the station than he'd been in the entire time humans had lived there. Close enough that they could see individual scales, each one inscribed with patterns that looked almost like writing in a language nobody could read. Holly stood paralyzed at the window, her arms wrapped protectively around Maya. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get her baby away from this creature that could destroy their entire station with a casual thought. But Maya wasn't scared. The baby was laughing, that bubbling, delighted laugh that comes from deep in a child's belly. She clapped her hands together and bounced in her carrier, absolutely thrilled with whatever she was seeing. Commander Peterson reached the observation deck, breathing hard. Everyone needs to evacuate, now. Get to the interior shelters. But nobody moved. They were all watching Cartharon, watching what happened next. Because the dragon, this being that had ignored every attempt at communication for longer than human civilization had existed, was doing something unprecedented. He raised one of his massive front legs, the claws alone as large as cargo containers. And with a care and precision that seemed impossible for something so enormous, he moved that leg in a deliberate arc. He was waving. The gesture was unmistakable. Cartharon, ancient guardian of the cosmos, silent observer of galaxies, was waving back at a human baby. Maya squealed with delight and waved both her arms frantically. Uncle! Uncle! The observation deck erupted in chaos. People were shouting, some in fear, others in amazement. Commander Peterson was trying to restore order while simultaneously attempting to understand what he was witnessing. Someone had started recording everything. Another person was trying to contact Earth, knowing that nobody would believe this without proof. Holly just stood there, tears streaming down her face, watching her daughter interact with a being that shouldn't be interacting with anyone. Maya kept waving and babbling, and Cartharon kept responding with small, gentle movements. At one point, he tilted his massive head, almost like he was curious, studying the tiny human with an expression that looked remarkably like wonder. Within hours, every species in the galaxy knew what had happened. Ships began arriving in the Meridian 7 system from across known space. The Valorians sent their most skilled diplomats. The ancient Kelhari dispatched their wisest scholars. Even species that normally avoided the Drakesh came, desperate to understand how humans had accomplished the impossible. They all wanted to try. Surely if a human baby could get a response, their own attempts would work now. The space around Meridian 7 became crowded with vessels from 100 different worlds, all broadcasting messages, all trying to capture Cartharon's attention. The dragon ignored every single one of them. He stayed where he was, close to the station, his ancient eyes watching. Waiting. And when Holly brought Maya back to the observation deck the next day, terrified but unable to resist her daughter's excitement, Cartharon was there. He moved closer to the window, and Maya laughed and waved, and the entire galaxy held its breath. Because something fundamental had just shifted in the universe. The Drakesh had broken their eternal silence. And somehow, impossibly, it had taken a human baby to make it happen. The Meridian 7 colony had become the center of the galaxy practically overnight. Ships crowded the orbital lanes, each one carrying delegates, scientists, religious leaders, and curious observers from every corner of known space. The small human outpost, which had barely rated a mention in galactic news feeds a week ago, now had representatives from civilizations that counted their history in millions of years. Holly Martinez went from being a cargo supervisor to the most important person in the galaxy, at least according to the hundreds of messages flooding her personal communicator. Ambassadors wanted meetings. Scientists wanted to study Maya. Religious groups claimed the baby was everything from a prophet to a cosmic joke. The pressure was overwhelming, but Commander Peterson and the colonial administration formed a protective barrier around Holly and her daughter. Nobody was going to turn this into a circus. Still, Holly couldn't just hide. Something incredible was happening, and deep down, she felt responsible for understanding it. So she established a routine. Every morning at 10 o'clock station time, she would bring Maya to the observation deck. And every morning, Cartharon would be there, waiting. The visit started simple. Maya would wave and babble, and Cartharon would respond with small movements, tilting his head or shifting his wings in ways that made the baby laugh. Other humans began joining them, watching in amazement as this ancient being engaged with a child who couldn't even walk yet. The dragon never acknowledged the adults. His attention remained fixed on Maya, as if nothing else in the universe mattered during those moments. Then Cartharon started doing something new. On the 5th day, he moved away from the station slightly and began manipulating the space around him. Dust particles that floated in the void suddenly swirled into patterns, forming shapes that glowed in the starlight. He created a spiral that spun slowly, catching the light like a galaxy in miniature. Maya clapped and giggled, pointing at the display with her tiny fingers. The next day, he made more complex patterns. Geometric shapes that folded into each other. Waves of light that rippled through the darkness. He was playing with her, the way any adult might entertain a baby, but he was doing it on a cosmic scale. Scientists watching from other ships went wild with excitement, analyzing every movement, trying to understand the physics behind what they were seeing. But Maya just laughed and enjoyed the show, completely unaware that she was witnessing abilities that had been theorized but never confirmed. By the end of the 2nd week, something even more remarkable happened. Holly had brought Maya for their usual morning visit. The baby had been a bit grumpy that day, fighting a slight cold, and she'd been fussy in her mother's arms. Holly almost turned back, thinking maybe they should skip a day. But as soon as they reached the observation deck and Maya saw Cartharon, the baby's face lit up. "Uncle," she called out, reaching for him. Cartharon moved closer than he ever had before, until his massive face filled the entire viewport. Up close, they could see details that had been invisible before. His scales weren't just bronze and gold, they held depths of color that seemed to shift and change, like looking into deep water. His eyes, enormous and ancient, held something that looked startlingly like gentleness. Maya pressed her little hands against the window, laughing. And then she said something else, a string of baby words that made no sense to anyone listening. Just the random babbling that toddlers do when they're trying to communicate but don't quite have the words yet. That's when it happened. A voice filled the observation deck. Not through speakers or communication systems. It simply existed, resonating in the minds of everyone present. Deep and vast, like continents grinding together in the depths of an ocean, yet somehow warm. Somehow kind. The small one speaks truth. "I am, Uncle." Holly nearly dropped Maya in shock. Around the observation deck, people gasped or cried out. Some fell to their knees. Others just stood frozen, unable to process what they just experienced. Throughout the station, every human had heard the voice. It had reached into their minds with a presence that was impossible to ignore, yet hadn't felt invasive. It had felt like a greeting. Cartharon had spoken. After millions of years of silence, After countless civilizations had tried and failed to elicit even a single response, a Drakesh had communicated with another species. And his first words were about a human baby who called him uncle. Maya, completely oblivious to the magnitude of what had just occurred, simply smiled and waved. "Uncle," she agreed happily. The voice came again, and this time there was something in it that might have been amusement. "Yes, small one. Uncle. You see, correctly." Commander Peterson stumbled into the observation deck moments later, his face pale. "Did everyone just hear that? Please tell me I'm not losing my mind." A linguist named Dr. Patricia Coleman, who'd been studying the Drakesh for 20 years, was crying openly. "He spoke. Oh my God, he actually spoke. This is impossible. This shouldn't be possible." But Holly wasn't focused on the historical significance or the scientific implications. She was a mother first, and her protective instincts kicked in despite her own shock. Are you going to hurt us?" she asked aloud, not sure if Cartharon would even hear her. The massive dragon's eyes shifted to focus on Holly specifically. When he spoke again, the voice came gentler, more controlled, as if he was learning how to modulate it for their comfort. "No, parent of the small one. I am guardian. I have watched over this place for 12,000 of your years. I mean no harm to those who dwell here." Holly felt her knees go weak with relief. Around her, other colonists were asking questions all at once, their voices overlapping in excitement and confusion. But Cartharon didn't respond to any of them. His attention returned to Maya, who was starting to get sleepy in her mother's arms, her head drooping against Holly's shoulder. "The small one grows tired," Cartharon observed. "Take her to rest. I will be here when she wishes to see her uncle again." It was said with such simple affection that Holly found herself smiling despite everything. This ancient, powerful being, this creature that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, genuinely cared about whether her daughter got a proper nap. As Holly carried Maya away from the observation deck, the baby looked back over her mother's shoulder and waved one sleepy hand. "Bye, uncle." And the voice that had been silent for epochs responded with unmistakable warmth. "Goodbye, small one. Dream well." The galaxy demanded answers. Ships from 1,000 worlds crowded the space around Meridian 7, each one carrying diplomats who insisted they needed to speak with Cartharon immediately. The Valorians claimed precedence because of their 3,000 years of attempted contact. The Kelhari argued their ancient wisdom earned them first audience. Newer species pushed forward with their own justifications, their own desperate need to finally communicate with the Drakesh. Cartharon ignored them all. He spoke only when Maya was present, and even then, only to the humans on the station. The other species found this infuriating and baffling in equal measure. Why would a Drakesh choose to communicate with humanity, the youngest and least sophisticated spacefaring civilization in known space? Commander Peterson found himself in an impossible position. He had ambassadors threatening everything from economic sanctions to military action if humanity didn't share access to Cartharon. He had his own government breathing down his neck, demanding he extract useful information from the dragon. And he had a tired young mother who just wanted her daughter to have a normal childhood, not become the galaxy's most important diplomatic asset. But Holly understood something that the politicians and ambassadors didn't. This wasn't about access or advantage. This was about her daughter and the strange, gentle being who called himself her uncle. So she kept bringing Maya for their daily visits, and slowly, carefully, Cartharon began to share his story. It started small. Dr. Coleman, the linguist, was allowed to join Holly on the observation deck, along with a small team of researchers. They weren't there to interrogate the dragon, just to listen and document. Cartharon seemed to appreciate the approach. When he spoke now, his voice came more easily, as if he was remembering how to shape thoughts into words that other species could understand. "You want to know why we fell silent?" Cartharon said one morning, while Maya played with blocks on the floor near the window. "Your scholars have theories. Some are close to truth." Dr. Coleman's hands shook as she activated her recording equipment. "We would be honored to understand." The dragon's massive eye fixed on her for a moment, then returned to watching Maya stack blocks into a wobbly tower. "We Drakesh are old. Older than most stars you can see from this place. We have witnessed galaxies form and die. We have seen species rise from primitive beginnings to span worlds, then fade into dust. We have seen everything." He paused, and in that silence, Holly could feel the weight of ages. She pulled her jacket tighter, suddenly cold despite the station's comfortable temperature. "Long ago, we spoke freely," Cartharon continued. "We shared our knowledge, our wisdom, our understanding of the cosmos. We thought we were helping younger species avoid mistakes, teaching them to reach their potential faster. We meant well. Maya's tower fell over with a clatter of blocks. She laughed and immediately started rebuilding, completely absorbed in her task. Cartharon watched her with what looked like fondness before continuing. But we learned a terrible truth. Our words carried too much weight. When a Drakesh spoke, civilizations listened. They listened too well. Species that talked with us stopped thinking for themselves. They waited for our guidance on every decision. They stopped questioning, stopped growing, stopped becoming what they could be. We were not helping them. We were crippling them. Dr. Coleman leaned forward. So you stopped talking to protect us. Some species worshipped us as gods, Cartharon said, and there was pain in that ancient voice. They built religions around our words, fought wars over interpretations of things we said casually. Other species feared us, became paranoid, stunted their own development trying to defend against threats we never posed. And others became dependent, like children who never learned to walk because they are always carried. Holly watched her daughter, who had successfully built a tower 3 blocks high and was reaching for a 4th. Maya didn't need help. She was figuring it out herself, learning through trial and error, growing through her own efforts. And suddenly Holly understood. You stopped talking because your voices were too powerful, she said softly. Because younger species needed to find their own way. Yes, Cartharon agreed. We debated for centuries. Some of us wanted to continue guiding, believing we could find a balance. But we could not. Our very presence in dialogue changed how species developed. So we made a choice. We would remain, we would watch, we would protect when absolutely necessary. But we would not speak. We would not interfere. We became guardians in silence, believing it was the kindest thing we could do. The observation deck had gone completely quiet. Even the researchers had stopped taking notes, just listening to this ancient being explain a decision that had shaped galactic history for millions of years. It was hard, Cartharon admitted, and Holly heard genuine emotion in his voice. We are not meant to be alone. We are not stones or stars. We think, we feel, we remember. The silence, it weighs heavy. But we believed it was necessary. Maya had finished her tower and now stood up, wobbling on unsteady legs. She'd only started walking a few weeks ago, and each step was still an adventure. She toddled toward the window, arms out for balance, determined to reach the glass where she could see Cartharon better. Then the small one looked at me, the dragon said, his voice becoming gentler. And she did not see a god to worship. She did not see a threat to fear. She did not see a teacher whose every word must be obeyed. She saw, uncle. Family. Someone who cares for her, but who she does not need to depend upon. Someone present, but not controlling. Maya reached the window and pressed her nose against it, leaving a small smudge. Uncle, she called happily. In that moment, Cartharon continued, I understood what we had lost. Connection without corruption. Relationship without dependency. She offers me affection, not worship. She expects nothing from me except to be present. And in her innocence, she showed me that perhaps the problem was not in speaking. Perhaps it was in how others chose to hear us. Dr. Coleman wiped tears from her eyes. So you're speaking to us because she, sees you differently? Humans are young, Cartharon said. Impulsive, chaotic, often foolish. But you have something we had forgotten could exist. You make friends with beings as powerful as yourselves. You argue with your own leaders. You question everything. The small one calls me uncle, and her mother worries I might harm her, and your commander treats me as a neighbor, not a deity. You see us as people. Different people, powerful people, but just people. Maya turned from the window and toddled back to her blocks, already losing interest in the conversation she couldn't understand. But she'd left her mark. She'd changed everything, just by being herself. So we Drakesh have discussed, Cartharon said. And we have decided that perhaps, with humans, we can try again. Carefully. As uncles and aunts, not as gods. As friends, not as masters. If you will have us. The decision sent ripples through the Drakesh scattered across the galaxy. For the first time in millions of years, these ancient beings began communicating with another species, and they chose humanity. Not the Valorians with their sophisticated diplomacy. Not the Kelhari with their ancient wisdom. Not any of the species that had tried for eons to establish contact. They chose the newcomers, the young upstarts who'd barely figured out how to leave their own solar system. The galaxy's reaction was predictable. Outrage from some species who felt they deserved this honor more. jealousy from others who saw humanity gaining an unfair advantage, fear from a few who worried what humans might do with Drakesh friendship, and fascination from many who simply wanted to understand how this impossible thing had happened. But the Drakesh were clear in their reasoning. Through Katharon, speaking to human representatives while Maya played nearby, they explained their choice. They would speak to those who could see them as Maya did. Without worship turning into blind obedience. Without fear turning into paranoia. Without respect turning into dependency. They would be uncles and aunts to humanity, present but not controlling, caring but not smothering. Other species tried desperately to prove they could offer the same relationship. The Valorian ambassador brought his own grandchild to meet a Drakesh near their homeworld, hoping to recreate the magic. The dragon remained silent. The Kelhari performed ancient rituals of kinship and friendship. Nothing. A dozen other civilizations tried their own approaches, each one convinced they could earn what humanity had stumbled into by accident. But the Drakesh had made their decision, and they weren't swayed by desperation or clever arguments. Katharon explained it to Dr. Coleman during one of their now regular conversations. The others still see us as something to be obtained. A resource to exploit, a mystery to solve, a power to harness. They try so hard to prove themselves worthy that they miss the point entirely. The small one never tried to prove anything. She simply offered love. That didn't mean humanity suddenly became the galaxy's dominant power. The Drakesh weren't handing over advanced technology or cosmic secrets. They weren't fighting humanity's battles or solving their problems. What they offered was something more subtle and, in its own way, more valuable. They offered conversation. Perspective. The kind of wisdom that comes from watching the universe turn for longer than most stars have burned. Katharon would talk with human scientists about the nature of space and time, not giving them equations or blueprints, but helping them think about problems in new ways. He would discuss philosophy with human teachers, sharing observations about civilizations he'd watched rise and fall. He would even, on occasion, offer gentle warnings about paths that other species had walked to their own ruin. But he never commanded. Never demanded. And most importantly, he never answered every question. When human researchers asked him how to build a faster-than-light drive that could cross the galaxy in days, he simply said, "When you are ready to build such a thing, you will understand why I should not tell you how." When politicians asked him to solve disputes or make decisions for humanity, he declined. "These are your choices to make. I am uncle, not parent. Uncle watches, supports, occasionally offers advice. But uncle does not live your life for you." Maya grew up in this new reality, completely unaware of how special it was. To her, Katharon was just Uncle Ka, the big friend who lived in space and did cool tricks with stardust. She'd wave to him when passing the observation deck on her way to daycare. She'd tell him about her day in toddler babble that nobody else understood but that Katharon listened to with grave attention. And sometimes, when she was sad or scared, she'd ask her mom to take her to see Uncle Ka, and the ancient dragon would create gentle light shows just for her until she smiled again. Other Drakesh began appearing near human colonies and ships. Not all of them, the majority still maintained their silent vigil over other parts of the galaxy. But enough that humanity started getting used to having these cosmic neighbors. A Drakesh named Velmora stationed herself near Mars and started talking with human artists, fascinated by their creativity. Another, Thexeloin, began conversations with human engineers, intrigued by their tendency to build clever solutions with limited resources. Each Drakesh approached things differently, but they all maintained the same boundary. They were friends, advisors, the cool aunt and uncle who showed up with interesting stories and different perspectives. They weren't saviors or rulers or gods. They were just there. Present, caring, but letting humanity make its own way. The other galactic species eventually had to accept this new reality. Some did so grudgingly, maintaining their resentment. Others adapted, realizing that the Drakesh weren't giving humanity any unfair advantages, just conversation. And a few began to wonder if maybe they'd been approaching the dragons wrong all along. Maybe the key wasn't in proving worthiness or demonstrating sophistication. Maybe it was in simply being genuine. Years passed. Maya Martinez started school, where her unusual friendship with an ancient space dragon made her popular for all the wrong reasons at first. But she handled it with the same straightforward honesty she brought to everything else. Yes, she had a friend who happened to be a million-year-old cosmic being. So what? He was nice, he was funny in his own weird way, and he gave good advice when she was figuring out math problems. Why did everyone make such a big deal about it? Commander Peterson, now Governor Peterson of the expanded Meridian 7 colony, sometimes stood at the observation deck and watched Cartheron floating in space. They'd become friends of a sort over the years, the human administrator and the ancient dragon. They'd talk about the challenges of leadership, about making decisions that affected others, about the weight of responsibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Peterson asked one day. "Breaking your silence? The galaxy hasn't exactly made things peaceful for you." Cartheron was quiet for a moment, watching ships come and go from the station, watching humans go about their busy lives. "No," he finally said. "The silence was necessary once. Perhaps it is still necessary for others. But with you, with humans, I remember what it feels like to simply talk. To share thoughts with minds different from my own. To care about individuals and watch them grow. The small one reminded me that connection is worth the risk." On the observation deck below, Maya was showing her little brother how to wave at Uncle Car. The toddler, barely 2 years old, mimicked his sister's gesture with chubby, uncoordinated hands. And across the void of space, an ancient being who had watched galaxies born waved back at a human child, grateful for the simple gift of being called uncle. The galaxy continued to turn. Species rose and fell, conflict sparked and resolved, the great cosmic drama played on. But in one small corner of space, humans and dragons had found something that everyone thought was lost forever. Not a hierarchy of power or a relationship of dependency, but something simpler and more profound. They'd found friendship. And sometimes, the most revolutionary changes come not from grand gestures or cosmic revelations, but from a baby looking at something ancient and powerful and seeing, without fear or ambition, just someone to love.